Hey, well, I wanted to hop on here and answer a question I've been asked repeatedly since the election, and that is, Jake, who are you going to support for governor? Well, I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about this, praying about this, and I've looked at what both men have said, both Mazzei and Drummond, and I've looked at their records and their positions on issues, and I've actually had the opportunity to sit down with both of them and talk about a number of things. And I want to explain not only who I'm supporting, but more importantly, why. Because I think the way we make these decisions is just as important, if not more important, than the decision itself. Now, I know both men. I respect both men. There are things I appreciate about both of them. So for me, this isn't just about who do I like more. It's not about who has the biggest endorsements. It's not about who has the most money. It's never been about that. And it's certainly not about picking a team and then defending everything our guy does. We have to move away from that in Oklahoma politics. My question is much simpler. Which candidate is more closely aligned with the principles I believe should govern Oklahoma? That's the standard. Principles first, candidates second. So let's start with the principles. What are those principles? Well, for me, everything begins with understanding where our rights come from. Our rights don't come from government. They don't come from the legislature. They don't come from the governor. They don't come from the courts. Our rights come from God. And if government didn't give us those rights, government doesn't have the authority to arbitrarily take them away. Government exists to secure those rights. It exists to administer justice, to protect innocent life. Government exists to protect liberty and property. And it exists to perform the limited functions delegated to it by the Constitution. And that also means there are things the government should not be doing. So whenever someone proposes another program in another agency, another regulation, or another government solution, I don't think our first question should be, how do we make this work better? Our first question should be, should government be doing this in the first place? And that philosophy heavily influences how I look at these two candidates. So after much thought, debate, consideration, after looking at it through that lens I just described, I've come to the conclusion that I am more closely aligned with Mike Mazzei. Because of that, I'll be supporting him for governor. But I want to immediately qualify that. That does not mean I agree with Mazzei on everything. I don't. And it doesn't mean I think Gentner Drummond is wrong about everything. I don't. And it certainly doesn't mean I'm going to attack Gentner Drummond personally. I've never done that. There's positions Drummond has taken that I agree with. There have been times when he's been willing to challenge political figures and interests, including people within his own party. And I have to acknowledge that. But there are also significant areas where I disagree with his record. I'm not going to just gloss over those disagreements simply to, make this sound more balanced and positive. Being fair doesn't mean pretending differences don't exist. So my question remains, which candidate is closest to the direction I believe Oklahoma needs to go? When I take a look at fundamental, foundational issues, I believe Mike Mazzei is the candidate, like I said, I most align with. And I want to go through a few of these issues. This is not about one issue in particular. But let's start with limited government. This is probably the biggest philosophical issue for me. Oklahoma doesn't simply need more efficient government, we need less government. And those are not the same thing. You can take a government program that shouldn't exist, that should not exist, and make it incredibly efficient. It's still something government should not be doing. And you can take an unnecessary agent and make it run beautifully it's still unnecessary. One approach to government asks, is government enforcing the law and doing its job effectively and efficiently? And that's an important question. But the limited government approach asks something more. It asks, should government be doing this at all? What is it costing taxpayers? And can we return this responsibility to the people? And that's much closer to my philosophy. And I would take it one step further. My first question is this actually a legitimate function of government? Because if the answer is no, then the solution isn't better management. The solution is to return the authority to individuals, families, communities, churches, businesses, or local government, wherever it properly belongs. And when I look at both candidates on that fundamental question, I believe Mike Mazzei's philosophy is closer to mine. Moving to taxes and spending, which is a close conversation to the one I just described. Everybody likes talking about tax cuts, and Republicans, we've been talking about cutting taxes forever. But here's the problem. You can't seriously talk about reducing taxes without talking about reducing government spending. And this is an area where I would like to hear both candidates speak more strongly about. If we don't deal with the fraud, waste, and abuse aggressively, and aggressively downsize agencies, tax reform remains mere rhetoric, and it's just moving numbers around. The real question isn't how much should government tax us? The deeper question is how much government are we willing to pay for? And if we want meaningful tax reform, then we have to be willing to examine every agency, every program, every appropriation, and every function of government. We have to ask, first, is this constitutional? Is it necessary? Is it effective? Could it be done locally? Could the private sector do it? Could families and communities do it? And if government shouldn't be doing it, why are taxpayers paying for it? That's the fiscal conversation Oklahoma needs. And that's another area where I find greater alignment with Mike Mazzei. He has a plan to eliminate the state income tax, which I agree with, and eliminate property tax for seniors. And I think that's a great start. I want to look at the issue of life, and it's another foundational issue for me because I believe life begins at conception. And if government has any legitimate purpose at all, surely one of its most basic responsibilities is protecting innocent life. Mike Mazzei has clearly stated that life begins at conception, and that's very important to me. And this isn't just another issue on a political checklist for me either. It's foundational. Because if our rights come from God, then our first right, the first right government must recognize is the right to life. Without life, none of the others matter. So on the protection of life, I find significant alignment with Mike Mazzei. Next, we have to look at education and parental authority. It's just another enormous issue we're looking at here in Oklahoma, and we cannot continue accepting poor educational outcomes and pretending that simply more money on the same system constitutes reform. Our children deserve better, our teachers and parents deserve better, and taxpayers, honestly, deserve results. Education reform isn't just about money, it's about literacy, it's about accountability, it's about discipline and empowering good teachers. It's about removing unnecessary bureaucracy and about transparency. And most importantly, it's about remembering something government sometimes forgets, that children belong to the parents, not the state. That parents are the primary authority in the lives and education of their children. Government should never attempt to replace them. And I've seen that Mike Mazzei has put a major emphasis on literacy, measurable results, and accountability. And I think that's very important. Speaking about accountability, this is an area where I see a real difference. And this is an area where I want to be particularly careful and fair. Gentner Drummond has challenged powerful political figures and institutions on a number of occasions, and I want to recognize that. But I also have serious disagreement with his record on government accountability. And it would be disingenuous for me to ignore these. because government accountability cannot be selective. It's not just about holding accountable the politicians, agencies, or institutions with whom we already disagree. The real test is whether we're willing to demand accountability, consistency, and especially when ordinary citizens are asking powerful institutions to answer difficult questions. And that's where I have concerns. One example is what happened in Payne County with the citizen-led grand jury effort. Citizens were attempting to use the grand jury process to investigate serious allegations, and the Attorney General's office intervened on the legal question, and the result was that the order convening that grand jury was ultimately vacated. And whatever someone's legal interpretation of that case may be, I'm deeply troubled by the outcome, because I believe government should make it easier for citizens to demand accountability from powerful institutions, not harder. And I also have serious questions about the response to the allegations involving vulnerable Oklahomans at a mental health facility. Allegations that included reports of people being beaten, choked, and even waterboarded. When allegations like that are made, I believe Oklahomans deserve transparency about what was investigated, who was investigated, what was discovered, and whether anyone was held accountable. And then there's DHS and child welfare, an issue particularly important to me. I've talked with families, I've listened to parents, I've studied cases, and the more I've learned about the system, the more I'm convinced that that there are significant child welfare reform needs. And when government possesses the extraordinary power to remove children from their homes, separate families, and fundamentally alter the trajectory of people's lives, the standard of accountability should be extraordinarily high. There must be due process. There must be transparency, and there must be meaningful, independent oversight. And when the system fails, there must be accountability. So this is also an area where I see an important distinction between the candidates. Mike Mazzei isn't simply saying DHS needs reform. He's already begun assembling people to study the problems within Oklahoma's child welfare system with an effort to develop meaningful reform proposals. And what I've seen so far tells me Mike is genuinely interested in understanding the problem, not simply finding a campaign talking point. And he's bringing people together to examine the system and identify where it's failing families and children, and determine what policy changes can actually address those failures. And that matters to me, because I don't want another politician who simply says, we're going to fix DHS. Too many have already said that. I want a governor willing to ask hard questions like, where is the system failing? Where are families being denied due process? Is our oversight truly independent? Are incentives within the system producing the wrong outcomes? How about, are we measuring success by the activity of the bureaucracy, or by whether children are actually safe and families are being treated justly? And what legislative, administrative, and structural reforms are necessary to fix it? The fact that Mike is asking those questions now before he's governor gives me greater confidence that DHS reform would actually be a priority in a Mazzei administration. And that's a significant factor in my decision. Next, I want to speak to something that's important to so many across the state, and that is property, land, and Oklahoma resources. And another major issue for me is land, our farmland, our water, our energy, our property rights, and our sovereignty. Oklahoma shouldn't be for sale to the highest bidder, especially when foreign interests, massive government subsidies, or political influence is involved. And this is an area where I want to be very clear. I don't care who endorses a project. I don't care whether Trump loves it. I don't care whether a Republican supports it or a Democrat opposes it. The question should always be, is this good for Oklahoma? Does it protect private property? These are some fundamental questions. Does it protect Oklahomans? Does it respect local communities? Does it require taxpayers to subsidize private interests? And does government pick winners and losers? Those are the questions we should be asking. And there may be individual projects where I disagree with Mazzei. There's several right now that I'm not sure about. But supporting a candidate doesn't require surrendering your judgment to that candidate. In fact, it shouldn't. I want to move to medical freedom, privacy, and individual liberty, because these are areas where I believe Oklahoma still has a long way to go. I believe strongly in medical freedom, that government should not be able to force medical decisions on citizens. I believe strongly in privacy. Guys, technology has given government surveillance capabilities our founders could have never imagined. License plate readers, massive databases, data sharing, digital tracking, artificial intelligence, all of that creates a fundamental question. Just because government has the technology to monitor citizens doesn't mean government should have the authority to do it. The Fourth Amendment still matters. Due process still matters. Property rights, parental rights, and individual liberty still matters. Frankly, there are areas like these where I would like to see both candidates go further. And I'll continue pushing whoever becomes governor to do exactly that. When I step back and I look at the whole picture, I see two different approaches to governing. There are areas where Gentner Drummond and I agree. There are areas where I believe he's been right, like on illegal marijuana grows. But there are also significant areas, particularly involving the proper role of government and institutional accountability, where I have serious disagreements. With Mike Mazzei, I find greater alignment around a philosophy of fiscal restraint, parental authority, protection of life, and questioning the size and scope of the state itself. And on DHS reform, I'm not just hearing rhetoric. I'm seeing Mike begin the work of asking questions, bringing people together, and developing potential solutions before he ever takes office. And these things matter to me. But my own philosophy comes back to an even more fundamental question. It's one I asked earlier. Before we ask whether government is doing something effectively or efficiently, let's first ask whether government should be doing it at all. And that's the lens through which I evaluate government and candidates. So when I put all that together, life, liberty, limited government, parental authority, property rights, government accountability, DHS reform, and Oklahoma sovereignty, I find myself aligning more closely with Mike Mazzei. So I'll be supporting him for governor, not because someone told me to, not because the president endorsed him, and not because I dislike Gentner Drummond. And it's not because I expect Mike Mazzei and I to agree on everything. I'm supporting him because when I take the personalities away, take the endorsements away, take the campaign politics away, and compare these candidates against the principles I believe should govern Oklahoma, Mike is just closer to where I believe Oklahoma needs to go. But understand something, please. My support doesn't come with blind loyalty. If Mike becomes governor, I'll do exactly what I would do with any governor. I'll support him when he's right. I'll challenge him when he's wrong. And if he doesn't correct course, he'll be challenged in 4 years. And I'll continue fighting for the principles that mattered before Mazzei and before Drummond and before even I ran for governor. Because politicians come and go. Elections come and go. Parties change. Personalities change. But principles remain. So whether you're supporting Mike Mazzei or Gentner Drummond, I'd encourage you to do the same thing. Don't start with the candidate and then change your principles to fit him. Start with your principles. Know what you believe. Know why you believe it. Then measure the candidates against that standard. That's how I'm making my decision. And after doing that, doing some self-inspection, I align closer with Mike Mazzei. Principles before politics, liberty before government. God bless you guys. God bless Oklahoma. We'll continue to pray for this state and trust God no matter what.